Hello there.
How's it going, y'all? This is not Jared. Thanks for visiting my channel, where in this video I'll be doing a breakdown and critique of Avengers Endgame. I know I'm a little bit late on this, but there are a lot of points of criticism I haven't seen applied to this movie, so I felt like it'd be a good way to kick off my channel. This movie was the highly anticipated close to the Infinity Saga of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. After it was re-released with some extra footage, Endgame leapt to the position of being the #1 grossing movie of all time, surpassing James Cameron's Avatar. However, Avatar ran in theaters for 8 months, while Endgame was only in theaters for 73 days. So did Endgame really earn this title? Let's get through this breakdown and I'll let you know what I think. Before we get started, help me out by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, hitting the notification bell, and following me on Twitter so you can be kept up to date when I release new content. Releases won't be on a regular schedule since the amount of time it takes to break something down varies based on the length of the movie or other media, but I will put out content as often as I'm able. Alright, without further ado, let's jump in. Immediately, the film opens with Clint Barton spending some time with his family. This is a nice moment because with all the superhero action we see, it's nice to be reminded that these characters are human and not just things that fight other things. In this scene, we see that he's wearing an ankle monitor, meaning he's on house arrest, presumably because of the side he took in Civil War. It makes sense that he would suffer some consequences for that, but how exactly is this a punishment? This has been his goal all along. He only came back in Civil War because his friends really needed him. He wants nothing more than to put the action-filled life behind him and just live with his family. Anyway, he turns away for a moment, and when he turns back, his entire family has disappeared. What exactly are the odds of this? If 50% of all life was eliminated, even though it is possible for this specific set of disappearances to happen, the odds are astronomically low. There's a way to figure out exactly what the odds are, but in high school I only got a B in statistics, so I'm not even going to try. Next, we cut to a scene of Stark and Nebula playing paper football. They've been adrift for a while after losing to Thanos, so they're probably just trying to distract themselves any way they can. After that, we see Tony leaving a recorded message for Pepper. This is an example of one of the best aspects of this movie, as well as most other MCU movies. The delivery by these actors is fantastic. The script of this scene fits Tony's character really well, and the emotional pull works perfectly. Unfortunately, immediately after, we see Captain Marvel's face. After her previous disaster of a movie, the writers decided they were going to try to put her in a better one, so right away I was curious if we'd have better character development for her than we had last time. Based on her immense power, one would expect that she would play a huge role in this story. Anyway, Captain Marvel just happens to find Tony Stark against all odds. How did this happen? How did she manage to find the one ship that would move the plot further just as Tony is on the brink of death? I know convenience gets pointed out in a lot of critiques, but come on, what are the odds of this? Also, where was she during Infinity War when the fate of the universe was hanging in the balance? When I first saw this, I was confused, but I expected there to be some believable reason for this that would be explained later. She then somehow brings him back to Earth from light years away, and we see more examples of the skillful delivery by the actors I discussed earlier. Shortly after this reunion, we see the group discussing the fact that Thanos successfully eliminated half of all life, at least on Earth, and Steve asks Tony if Thanos gave him any clue as to where he was going. Tony starts going off about how Rogers broke his trust, speaking in broken points that are difficult to make sense of, obviously quite delirious. I do want to point out here that the production team did a really good job of portraying how someone would look and act after what Tony had just been through. We then see Captain Marvel say that she's just gonna go kill Thanos, just like that. Aside from the fact that she's being completely dismissive of the team's efforts, her power came from one Infinity Stone. Thanos had all 6 stones, one of which being the thing that gave her her power. Bold assumption that she can just kill him, despite an entire team of superheroes being unable to do so. After being asked if she even knows where he could be, she says she knows people who might? Who? Who does she know? Why would they know where Thanos is? This line really doesn't make any sense. It just seems kind of wedged into the script so she would have some way to respond to the question. The argument ends up being meaningless because Nebula says she knows where he is. Except for the fact that she doesn't know where Thanos is. She just provides us some exposition and says he'd be at the garden. Turns out, Rocket is actually the one that finds him by scanning for an energy signature created by using the stones. Nebula contributes by saying, "Thanos is there." Thanks, Nebula. They decide to get the stones and use them to bring everyone back. Bruce Banner asks the fair question, why would it go any differently than last time? Carol replies, because before you didn't have me. Sensing this blind arrogance, Rhodes points out that they are all, in fact, superheroes, and he questions where she was when Thanos was enacting his plan. She says, there are a lot of other planets in the universe, and unfortunately, they didn't have you guys. How is this an acceptable justification? The conflict with Thanos affected every planet in the universe. If she wanted to protect those other planets, she would have been there helping the Avengers take Thanos down. Did she have no idea this was going on? Is it because Fury didn't call her? If not, why didn't he call her? The fact that her movie wasn't released until after Infinity War is the most likely explanation, though I'd expect Marvel's writers to do a better job of working her into the story. Nevertheless, everyone is just like, huh, good point, and they don't press her about it at all. Then Thor walks up to her, pulls Stormbreaker to his hand, and, when seeing that she doesn't flinch, says, I like this one. Why do you like this one? She seems to have been deliberately written to be unlikable. Wasn't overcoming the kind of arrogance she's displaying a huge part of how you became worthy to be the mighty Thor? Is the only reason you like her because she didn't flinch? This just felt really forced as a way to make it seem like she'd become part of the group. Then they board Rocket's ship and, using the technology that makes the Lightspeed engine from the Captain Marvel movie obsolete, they head to the location and find a retired Thanos. He seems to be in really bad shape, so they're able to subdue him fairly easily. Thor immediately lops off his arm and the gauntlet with it. They see that the stones are gone, and Thanos says, I used the stones to destroy the stones, creating a template that would go on to be used in thousands of memes. But how is he able to just destroy the very things that hold the fabric of reality, time and space together? This had no implication for the entire universe as soon as he did that. We later see that the stones maintain, at the very least, the flow of time. Couldn't this possibly cause reality to fall apart? Did the writers even notice that they created a serious problem in their fictional universe? Thanos tells them that the universe required correction, and now that it was done, there was no need for the stones. So there won't ever be a need for correction again? I thought that the problem he was trying to solve was the result of the natural tendency of life, the tendency of resources to be spread thin and become less and less available to the masses. Why wouldn't this happen again at some point in the future? They just assume he's not lying because Nebula says he isn't a liar. Thanos generates some more memes, and Thor just cuts off his head. That was a little bit hasty on his part. He's not even a little bit suspicious that Thanos may have been lying. Now they just have to assume that Thanos was telling the truth and move forward. We jump ahead to 5 years later, and everyone is still trying to cope with the new reality. Rogers is in a group session where people are talking about their struggles with living in a world after the Infinity War. This scene shows just how difficult it has been for the world and the universe to cope with such a sudden and massive loss. This scene is really effective, and to me it seems to be a very realistic way the world might be after a tragedy like this. Chris Evans delivers this scene really well. Now we get to talk about the biggest example of convenience in a plot I have ever seen. In what effectively becomes the most pivotal act in the whole movie, we see a rat release Ant-Man from the quantum realm where he'd been trapped all this time. A rat. So now we're to understand that if a rat had not climbed around in this van, all would be lost? A rat saved the universe? This device is apparently simple enough to be activated by the accidental press of a button by a rat. Unfortunately, the rat will get no recognition for this massive assist, and I think that shows just how ungrateful the universe can be. Unsurprisingly, now that Ant-Man is back, he is shocked by the state of the world around him. Paul Rudd does some pretty great acting that gives us another meme, and also gives us a tear-jerking scene where he's reunited with his daughter. Very quickly, we cut to a scene of Black Widow talking to holograms of the various remaining members of her group, desperately trying to handle everything she can. Captain Marvel then says, "You might not see me for a long time," as a throwaway line explaining to the audience that we will not see her very much in this movie at all. What is the point of even bringing her into this story if you're just going to have her disappear for most of it? She's obviously quite powerful and could be a big help to the Avengers moving forward, so could the writers just not come up with something useful for her to do? We've seen that these writers are capable of producing good content, so why is their production so lazy when it comes to her? Maybe it just would have been too expensive to have her in the movie longer than a few short minutes. After this, we have some short dialogue between Natasha and Rhodes discussing the fact that Hawkeye has gone rogue, and they are currently searching for him. Once Rhodes leaves, Steve Rogers arrives and makes an unsuccessful attempt to cheer her up.
Good job.
She talks about how even though many of the Avengers are gone, she's still trying to be better because of them. This is setting us up for something very important in her future, and this is one of the few setups that actually has a payoff in this movie. Feed from the front gate pops up, and our heroes learn that Ant-Man is back. While they're talking with him, it's obvious that he's quite shaken up from his extended time in the quantum realm. We then get a brief explanation of the quantum realm and his theory about using it as an avenue to go back in time and fix everything, since time works differently when inside the quantum realm. To figure out if this is possible, they decide to talk to Tony Stark about the idea. We then see Tony at his lake house where he now has a daughter and has settled down with Pepper. This is a big problem for me because it just fast forwards to the end of Tony's development. Let's talk about Tony Stark's arc for a minute. Throughout the Iron Man movies, there has been a progression through separate arcs. In Iron Man 1, the arc was about what he was going to do about the fact that his weapons were causing suffering. In Iron Man 2, he had to deal with an enemy created by his father while finding a way to prevent his own death. Then, in the first Avengers movie, the question was, would he be the guy who could make the sacrifice of self for the good of others? The answer to this question was yes. After that movie, we understand that Iron Man is willing to put the well-being of others before himself, and this has become a part of his character. It's not useful writing to explore this question any further. In Iron Man 3, the arc becomes whether he would finally put the dangerous life behind him and settle down with Pepper. Supposedly, based on the ending, the answer was yes, but we see in Infinity War that he failed to commit to that lifestyle, so the arc was unresolved. Now we come back to this movie. He has settled down and wants nothing to do with the hero life anymore. We skipped any development and he's automatically resolved this arc. Anyway, Tony tells them that the odds of successful time travel is a near impossibility and that Ant-Man coming back was a 1,000,000,000 to 1 fluke. He says he can't roll the dice on possibly losing his daughter in order for everyone to gain what they've lost. This sets up a potentially massive moral question for him in the future. Would he be willing to sacrifice what he has to save everyone else? It's a morally messy question. Could he essentially sacrifice his daughter to bring back half of the universe's population? It's a really messy question and could be really interesting to explore. Having been shot down, the group leaves Tony's house. Since Tony refuses to help, they decide to go see if Bruce Banner could make this plan work. This interaction is one of the biggest examples of the writers completely ignoring a character's setups in this movie. Remember at the end of Infinity War when Banner, speaking to Hulk inside of him, says that he and the Hulk need to work their issues out? This set up a huge payoff where Bruce Banner has a defining moment with the Hulk and the separate personalities work out their differences, but they completely skip over it for the convenience of having the brains of Banner and the brawn of Hulk from the very start. For a large portion of this movie, it seems like the main point of his character is laughs, which doesn't really fit with his history on screen. So then we cut back to Tony Stark and we see that he's grieving over the loss of Peter Parker, for which he feels responsible. This guilt prompts him to start attempting to figure out time travel. Despite it being pretty much impossible, Tony figures out how to make it work really quickly. I can't help but be grateful for this because personally I think 3 hours is already way too long for a movie. Anyway, Pepper is actually the one who convinces him that helping the others is something he's morally obligated to do, since he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't help. Back at Avengers HQ, the others are trying to get time travel to work. Despite failing multiple times at the thing that will fix all of their problems, Bruce Banner is in a fantastic mood, good enough to give us more memes. I don't see how that fits the tone of what they're trying to accomplish at all. We saw earlier that pretty much everyone is depressed almost all the time about the recent tragedy, but we're getting hit with a bunch of slapstick humor that really doesn't fit the tone they've set. After a series of jokes, Tony Stark shows up, ready to help, and returns Captain America's shield. Now it's time to set out and assemble the Avengers. First, Smart Hulk and Rocket set out for New Asgard? Asgardians still exist? When Thanos attacked the Asgardians in Infinity War, the ship looked absolutely decimated. The Guardians of the Galaxy find Thor floating through space amidst the wreckage. Where did the rest of the Asgardians come from? How did they get to Earth? We don't ever get answers to these questions, and Smart Hulk and Rocket come face to face with Fat Thor. The fact that Thor got fat isn't really that important, it just confuses me that they'd have Thor reach the absolute height of his power in Infinity War for apparently no reason. That, and their only goal for Thor in this movie seems to be making him the butt of a bunch of jokes. Smart Hulk mentions Thanos' name and Thor is scared? When did this become part of his character? Courage has never been even a small struggle for Thor, even as he suffers devastation after devastation. But this specific loss turns him into a coward? Not only is he now a coward, but they have also basically turned Thor into a bumbling idiot, despite him being a pretty serious character for the majority of his time on the big screen. They've wrecked his character so much that apparently he's convinced to do something he's terrified of doing because there's beer on the ship. What an utter waste of a good character just so we can have slapstick humor in the movie. Next up, we see that Clint Barton has become a ruthless vigilante, killing dozens of criminals just in the short time we see him on screen. We haven't really had enough background on him to judge whether or not this fits his character, but I personally enjoyed seeing someone in the MCU being the ruthless dispenser of justice. One thing I don't understand is his reasoning for doing this. How does the loss of his family turn him into a murderous vigilante? Perhaps his family was the only thing motivating him to act in an upright manner, and now that they're gone, so is that motivation? There's no way to say whether this is the case or not because, as of yet, we have yet to see any small part of his past. Black Widow walks up to him and tells him there may be a chance they could fix everything, and he says, "Don't give me hope." Despite it being a beloved meme, I don't see a reason for him to not want hope. All he wants is his family back, so desperately that it turned him into this. He doesn't want hope that things could get better? We then cut to a scene where the group has some snazzy new time travel suits. Apparently their supply of Pym particles is limited, so they have to conserve them. Ant-Man accidentally wastes one of them by shrinking down, so that should make this a lot more dangerous, right? Anyway, they start discussing the rules of time travel, and Rhodes suggests killing baby Thanos. Smart Hulk explains that nothing they do in the past can affect their present, because their perceived time changes when they travel back, so killing baby Thanos is out of the question. This explanation brings up a pretty obvious issue. They have a limited supply of Pym particles, and nothing they do in the past affects the future. So why can't they go back in time to where they can get more Pym particles? Is it because their actions can create separate timelines, so they need to exercise extreme caution in what they do when they travel back in time? That would actually make a lot of sense, and it would cause some serious tension and conflict in the future. This theory is confronted a little bit later, and they're going to show us that the issue with their plan is just a little bit different. Well, their time travel test goes off without a hitch, so they have a series of comedic scenes where they try to decide what time to travel to in order to get the stones, because their supply of Pym particles makes it necessary for some reason. During this planning, we see that Thor is asleep during this important planning. Why? Why must they just ignore Thor's character just to make him the butt of some jokes? I know I've said it already, but Thor has primarily been a fairly serious character throughout his appearances on screen. What they've done to Thor's character in this movie is worse than any other character, and it's pathetic that the writers couldn't come up with a better way to be funny than childish slapstick humor. But that seems to be all Disney wants to do now. Now it's time to do some time travel. Captain America gives a speech, which is never a bad thing, even if the tone is interrupted with some throwaway humor. They zoom through the quantum realm and pop up in the past, and also somehow at another location. If they're shrinking down to go back in time, how does that allow them to end up at a different location? They're shrinking. It's not like they're teleporting. I'm not saying it's impossible because I'm no quantum physicist, but this is never explained. Why, if they can basically teleport to another location, do Hawkeye and Black Widow have to take a ship from Morag, where Nebula and Rhodes are, in order to get to Vormir, even though they arrived at a completely different planet without travel? Nevertheless, they pop up in places we've seen previously in the MCU, and we get some nostalgic shots of some really good movies. There's nothing wrong with plugging nostalgia, but as an effect, it really only works the first time you see a movie. Smart Hulk goes to get the Time Stone from the Sorceress Supreme, and we see that she's fighting in the battle from the first Avengers movie, but she's only defending her building and nothing else. Why is this? With as powerful as she is, and the fact that she looks into the future to prevent catastrophe, she was absolutely no help during this fight. The only catastrophe she's preventing is damage to her building. That's kind of a selfish move on her part, if you ask me. She tells Smart Hulk that Doctor Strange isn't a wizard yet, and he's performing surgery 20 blocks away, in the middle of a massive battle. Why is he performing surgery? It's not like he's working in the ER helping with victims of the battle. He performed precision surgery on the nervous system. That would still go on during a massive battle? It doesn't really make sense, so I'm not sure why this line is in the movie. Smart Hulk tries to get the Time Stone from her, so she pushes his astral body out of his real body, and now he has to convince her instead of using force. We then cut to Asgard, where Thor and Rocket have come to retrieve the Reality Stone. Thor immediately wants to go drink, and Rocket says, "Aren't you drunk enough already?" Because we can't let Thor take their mission seriously. We have to have him be a bumbling idiot. He then sees his mother and begins to have a panic attack. Okay, I can see how it would be traumatic, but a panic attack? This guy has been alive for thousands of years and seen some horrific stuff, and the mere memory of a deceased loved one is what sends him into a panic attack? He's absolutely terrified. Where did this cowardice come from? To snap him out of this, Rocket slaps him and tells him that they have a chance to bring back the people that can be saved. Thor pretty much instantly runs away. I want to quit harping on what they did to Thor, but it's just awful, and it's on display every time he's on the screen. Meanwhile, we see that Nebula, Rhodes, Clint, and Natasha have arrived on Morag, where Star-Lord found the Power Stone. Somehow they've traveled light years, but Clint and Natasha still have to fly to Vormir. We've already discussed why that doesn't make sense, but why do they have to get the Soul Stone and come right back? Later we see that all they have to do is shrink back to get to the Avengers headquarters, no travel needed. Did the writers just forget about this? All it takes is the click of a button and they're back home. Nebula says that all they have to do is not fall out of the ship, which is kind of weird. Those two have never shown any signs on screen of being morons, so that line makes little sense. As Clint and Natasha fly away, Clint says, "We're a long way from Budapest," in reference to their history together, also giving us nostalgia for their lines about it in the first Avengers movie. The reference to the first movie is for the nostalgia plug, but the reference to their history doesn't work very well because we know next to nothing about their shared history. Maybe we'll see something about it in the Black Widow movie, but as of right now, it serves little purpose. We then see Bad Nebula and past Thanos. Turns out that bad Nebula has a glitch and sees what good Nebula sees. How? Is there some kind of Nebula network just in case another Nebula from another time just happens to appear? Does this mean good Nebula will glitch at the same time and see what bad Nebula sees? There's never a real explanation for why this is a thing, but it's not on screen long enough for us to think about it. We then cut back to Tony, Rogers, and Scott heading to get the Tesseract and the Mind Stone. We see Ant-Man, a 200-pound man, on Tony's shoulder, and then he says, "Flick me." It was extensively explained in the Ant-Man movie that the Pym particle formula doesn't shrink molecules, it decreases the space between them, so his weight won't change, just his density. So how can Tony hold 200 pounds on his shoulder and also flick it across a room? I should point out that this issue isn't unique to this movie. It's a problem that's present in every movie in which Ant-Man appears, whether he's growing or shrinking. They're trying to get the Tesseract, so Ant-Man is causing some medical problems for past Tony. Scott is doing a lot of shrinking for someone with limited Pym particles, isn't he? Isn't he using up precious chances to find the stones? Tony manages to grab the Tesseract and head for the stairs, but gets knocked down by the Hulk, even though he should have known that's where Hulk was. He drops the case holding the Tesseract and it just pops open. This case doesn't have a more complex locking mechanism than a latch that pops open if it's dropped. Because of this, Loki grabs the Tesseract, teleports somewhere else, and they've blown it, supposedly, because they have no second chances, as was made abundantly clear. Anyway, present Rogers runs into past Rogers and they have a fight over the scepter, and present Rogers stops him by using the scepter. I didn't know it was that easy to use, but nevertheless, Captain America makes a getaway with the Mind Stone. We then go back to see Banner and the Ancient One and run into the biggest problem with the plot of this movie. She explains that the Infinity Stones maintain what we experience as the flow of time, reinforcing the absurdity of Thanos destroying them with no consequences for the universe, and that removing one would create a branch reality, a separate timeline. So it is now made clear that no matter what their actions are in the past, the only thing that will create a new timeline is taking the stones elsewhere in time, because it creates a new reality in which one of the stones doesn't exist anymore. If this is the case, it creates a lot of problems. All of the actions that they've taken thus far and that they've yet to take would have drastically changed a lot about the chain of events up to their present. If it's all one timeline and their actions can't create new timelines, how did their actions not affect their present? Wouldn't these characters remember these experiences caused by their future selves returning to the past? If it's all one timeline that the stones maintain, how is it possible that their actions don't change it? When they are in the past, they are experiencing a previously non-existent reality. Is this reality just temporary and it ceases to exist as soon as they return to present day? That would basically mean they're erasing an entire reality, which seems much worse than what Thanos did. All of this goes without explanation, but now the characters can take any action they want with no consequences. A lot of times when things like this are pointed out, critics are accused of reading too deep into the movie. It bothers me when people say this, because if applying some critical thought is all it takes for a story to fall apart, then it's obviously not very well written. Let's talk about writing fiction for a moment. When you create a work of fiction that's not based on our reality, you essentially create a new universe in which different things are possible and there are different rules that are followed. To enjoy fiction like this, fiction that's not based on our own reality, we as an audience engage in something called the suspension of disbelief. This means that we accept that this story has different rules that govern this specific reality. For example, in this movie, we ignore the fact that we can't travel through time, but accept that it's possible in this fictional universe. At the beginning of the fictional story, very little explanation is needed, and we learn these rules as we move through the story. As you progress, you get one of two things: either exposition of some possibilities, or new rules, before we see it happen, such as the scene in A New Hope when Obi-Wan explains the existence of the Force before we see it in action. Alternatively, we see something happen as a shocking revelation, with explanation after the fact, unless there's a simple connection that can be inferred between the established rules and the newfound revelation. An example of this would be when we see the Emperor use Force lightning in Return of the Jedi, and we can infer that this is a power of the dark side that we haven't yet seen. Back to this movie. When we have Smart Hulk explain that their actions in the past can't affect their own timeline, it makes it seem as though their actions would instead create an alternate timeline, which is why caution is necessary. Now we have this scene explaining that it's not actions that create new timelines, but the removal of an Infinity Stone to another point in time. We have no further explanation of the implications of this. All we know now is that as long as they return the stones to the moment they took them, they can act without any consequences. The writers deliberately raised the stakes of time travel only to make them completely irrelevant. Anyway, the Ancient One ends up giving Smart Hulk the Time Stone because Strange must have had a good reason for giving giving it up, since he's meant to be the best of the wizards. She knew he was meant to be the best, yet she threw him out when he first showed up to learn magic in his own movie. That's kind of a weird thing to do, if you ask me. We then see Thanos, his lackey, and Gamora all gathered around Bad Nebula. Apparently, she has a network that Good Nebula is sharing. Why does this exist? What would have been the reason for creating this network? Why haven't we heard anything about this before? The purpose obviously isn't for them to interface with her memory files, because we see that they have to plug a cord into her head to do that. It's just a sudden convenient plot point to create the possibility that the heroes might fail. Now we're back on Asgard, where Thor is busy ignoring his character development. He runs into his mother, and she realizes that he's from the future. They have a talk, and she says that the fact that he failed means he's just like everyone else. When he says he's not supposed to be like everybody else, she says, "Everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are." This has got to be one of the dumbest lines I've ever heard.
Knights of Ren. Cool.
The most important part of a hero's journey in modern literature is the struggle to become who they're supposed to be. In early literature, like King Arthur or Beowulf, the hero's struggle was a physical one against some monster, and these stories implicitly represent personal struggles in real life. As history progressed, the hero's journey became more of an explicit inward journey of personal development. This development is the reason we have the iconic Spiderman line, "With great power comes great responsibility." Based on this mantra, Peter Parker resolves to stop being self-centered with the use of his powers and strives to become what he's supposed to be, a hero who protects those who can't protect themselves. If there is nothing we're supposed to be, no goal, then there is no development. We would just have character exposition and the characters would act the same way they always have. The writers are now explicitly telling us that development doesn't matter, and therefore we can have the characters act in ways that contradict the fact that they are in fact heroes. Anyway, Thor feels better after talking to his mom. Rocket shows up with the Reality Stone, and Thor calls Mjolnir to himself, realizing that he's still somehow worthy to wield it. Their mission being a success, they shrink back to the future, bringing Mjolnir along. Back on Morag, War Machine decides to knock out Peter Quill because their actions just have no consequences, and the pair retrieves the Power Stone. Right as they're about to shrink back to their time, Good Nebula malfunctions and doesn't manage to travel back in time because Bad Nebula is accessing the Nebula Network. We then see that Thanos is watching the scene of his death and has figured out their plan. Good Nebula wakes up and realizes that Thanos knows and runs back to the ship to contact Hawkeye and Black Widow and tell them the bad news. Why exactly is this bad news? You've already collected the Power Stone and Thanos has no idea where the other two are. Why not just go back to the future immediately? Why does it matter that Thanos knows your plan if he has no way of getting there? Just shrink back and he can't do anything about it at all. The writers are really trying to portray this as important, even though it's not, just so that they can get Thanos to the future for the big fight scene. The setup for the final battle is the only reason to have Good Nebula freak out and get captured, and they completely ignored the logical flaws that lead up to it.
Wait a minute, how did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Nevertheless, Good Nebula has been captured, even though she could have escaped back to her own time at any point during this capture. Back in New York, Tony, Steve, and Scott are talking about how they lost the Tesseract. They keep talking about how they had one shot and they blew it, when Tony comes up with a brilliant plan. He and Rogers will just go back in time to where they can get both the Tesseract and more Pym particles, begging the question of why they didn't get more particles in the first place. By suggesting this plan, they prove without a doubt that it is something they can do, so there's absolutely no reason they couldn't have done it from the very start. By including this, the writers artificially raise the stakes with the illogical one-shot plan, only to completely erase the stakes with this plan. When the drama is artificial, it doesn't have any real effect, and this makes it plainly obvious. Scott takes the Mind Stone to the future, and the pair of Avengers head back further in time. Tony and Steve arrive at a military base in 1970. They split up to make haste. Steve goes for the Pym particles and Tony goes for the Tesseract. Security seems really lax here for a base that has two very important top-secret projects. Tony arrives where the Tesseract is held and there are no guards, no researchers, no security of any kind. This doesn't make any sense. These are probably the most well-guarded secrets this organization has. Anyway, he uses a laser to split open the safe and sticks the Tesseract in a briefcase. As he is shutting the briefcase right in front of the safe containing the Tesseract, Howard Stark sees him and is not suspicious at all, even handing Tony the briefcase containing the Tesseract, which Tony almost forgot. Howard isn't at all suspicious about this, despite Tony acting very much like someone who's guilty. He doesn't happen to glance over at the safe just to make sure there's no funny business going on at this top secret research facility. The safe was split open with a laser. It's not like it was opened and shut again. This guy's supposed to be a genius. None of this makes sense. They get to the elevator and talk about the fact that Howard Stark's wife is pregnant, and Howard hopes it's not a boy because there's less chance a girl would end up just like him. When Tony asks why that would be a bad thing, he says, "The greater good has rarely outweighed my own self-interest." This is another moment where we seem to be getting some kind of setup for a big moral decision on Tony's part. Can he sacrifice what he has to save everyone else? This gave me pretty high hopes for the possibility of a defining moment for him. Unfortunately, we don't ever get a payoff for this. After this, we see Captain America hiding from people who are finally suspicious of these two, and he sees Agent Carter through a window. We see some remorse for what he lost in the first movie, and this setup actually does have a payoff. Also, him putting these feelings aside to fulfill his duty fits well with what we know about his character. We cut back to the captured Good Nebula, and Bad Nebula takes her time travel device and disguises herself as Good Nebula. Just a reminder that all of this is just so they can have a big fight scene without a coherent way to set it up. Now we see Clint and Natasha on Vormir, heading to get the Soul Stone. Once again, we hear, in order to take the stone, you must lose that which you love. So now they love each other? The Soul Stone accepts anyone? The degree of love for the other person doesn't matter? They get into an argument about who needs to die, each of them wanting to be the one to do it. But why would it be Barton? He has a wife and kids. He has a family to take care of. He wants to die and abandon his family out of simple guilt for the bad things he's done? We've gotten hints that he could have been like that in the past, so why does it matter now? It obviously needs to be Natasha. They start trying to jump off the ledge and keep the other person from doing so, and ultimately, Natasha is the one who's sacrificed. This is a decent finish for her character, showing us the final iteration of her struggle to be better for the people in her life. So now they've all come back. They've got the stones, and everyone is none the wiser about Bad Nebula, and they realize Natasha is gone. Side point, Good Nebula knew that Thanos killed Gamora to get the Soul Stone, so why wouldn't she have been able to warn them that a sacrifice was necessary before they set out? Anyway, they argue and come to the conclusion that the stones can't bring her back. They take the stones and put them into an Iron Man glove. It's a little weird that the stones can be used this way. Thanos had to go to Nidavellir and have a device created in the heart of a dying star in order to harness the power of the stones. But I guess an Iron Man glove works too? They then debate on who is going to snap their fingers. Another side note, why is it a snap? In other movies, when they're saying that if Thanos had the stones, he could eliminate half of all life with a snap of his fingers, I honestly thought that they were talking metaphorically about how easy it would be for him to do. Did they really have to make it a literal snap? It just seems super tacky and silly. But I digress. They argue and come to the conclusion that Smart Hulk will be the one to do it, which makes sense. He's the closest to being invincible out of all of them, so it's the wise choice. During all of this, Bad Nebula is hatching her plan to bring Thanos to the future. Very quickly, we learn that they can just bring everyone back and not change anything about the last 5 years, completely ignoring Tony's setups about possibly having to lose what he's gained for the greater good. That's just brushed aside, along with any possibility of an interesting story for him. This was a missed opportunity for some genuinely amazing storytelling. Smart Hulk puts the glove on and we cut back to Nebula. Apparently she can just bring a ship through the quantum tunnel? How? Wasn't Tony the only one who could figure out how to navigate the quantum realm? Didn't they need Pym particles and a device to navigate them through the quantum realm? How is this even possible, and how is she able to do it, assuming that it is possible? Now, they've used the Infinity Stones and soon realize they have brought everyone back. Nobody realizes that Thanos' massive ship has blown a hole in the ceiling and is hovering above them. Immediately, the ship rains down hundreds of missiles, obliterating their headquarters. Miraculously, there are exactly 0 casualties. How? Not one person died from that? Not even one of the completely normal, unenhanced people? Scott, Clint, Rocket? Not a single casualty? So basically, this was an absolute waste of firepower, and Thanos really needs to upgrade his weapons, because that is just insane. After we are shown that absolutely everyone survived, Thanos decides to sit outside while Bad Nebula searches for the stones. Also, for some reason, Thanos not only left Good Nebula alive, but brought her with them to the future? Why wouldn't he have just killed her or left her in the past? I don't see any reason that bringing her would help him in any way, so I guess we just have to assume that Thanos didn't think it through. Anyway, Thor, Tony, and Captain America go outside to confront Thanos. Now we get to the ruin of Thanos' character. Now he says he's going to destroy everything in the universe and build a new universe. He no longer acts like he's doing the right thing or like he is doing any of these acts for the good of the universe. Now he's just a typical, uninteresting, sadistic villain hell-bent on destruction. It's no longer that the ends justify the means. the means have become the end. Every well-written villain is the hero of their own story, but poorly written villains are bad just because that's the way they are. There are very few notable exceptions to this, such as the Joker, but that only works because of the dynamic with the main hero. Another issue with what Thanos said, why wouldn't the new universe he creates eventually have the same problem? Isn't the thing he was trying to solve that life becomes too abundant and there aren't enough resources for everyone? In this universe, it was the natural progression of life that caused this, so how is destroying it all and starting anew going to solve anything? This was the flaw in his original plan, but it's even more pointless in this iteration. Anyway, we see bad Nebula take the stones from Barton and she gets killed by good Nebula, so that's over quickly. Thanos and the three Avengers are fighting, and he seems to be much stronger now without the stones than he was in Infinity War with the stones. Though we do get to see that Captain America is worthy to hold Mjolnir, so that was a pretty cool moment. However, right after this, we see that Thanos' sword can somehow break Cap's shield. How is this possible? Within this universe, we've been told that vibranium is basically the best material in existence, completely invulnerable except to other vibranium. So how is it that it's destroyed by some random sword? There are many theories like that the sword is also vibranium or that it was made on Nidavellir, but this was never explained. The problem with theories like this is that people are basically trying to supplement the story with their own ideas to make the story believable. We are not the writers, and therefore, even if our theory makes sense, or even if the writers of the story give reasoning after the fact, it's not part of the story that we're seeing on screen. It can't be used as justification for things we see when looking at the story as written. Therefore, this happening makes no sense because we've never seen or heard of anything that can damage vibranium. Back in the fight, Thanos tells Captain America that he will enjoy destroying their planet, so we get more of the sadistic version of Thanos before he beams down his army. Luckily, all the other heroes show up for our big fight scene. It's a pretty effective moment, though a few of them making it there doesn't make too much sense. There's a bunch of fighting that's pretty good CGI, and I'm not going to cover the entire final battle because it takes a long time. Anyway, Star-Lord gets to meet past Gamora, setting us up to having her back in the Guardians of the Galaxy, but without their shared history, we can expect that it will be a totally different relationship. But if they can bring back past Gamora, why can't they go back in time and bring back Natasha? It's just never considered even once. They could go back to right before she died and bring her back to the present and it would be exactly the same. Anyway, next our heroes start thinking about what to do with the Infinity Stones to keep them from Thanos. Cap rightly tells them to get the stones as far away as possible, but then Smart Hulk says they need to take them back to where they came from. Why do they have to do this now? It's time travel. You basically have an unlimited amount of time to hold on to them until you beat Thanos. Just have a wizard transport them somewhere to the other side of the world with a couple of people to protect them and then wrap up the battle. However, no one thinks about this at all because we need to give Thanos some opportunity to take them. Anyway, they decide to go for the quantum time machine in the Ant-Man van. And apparently Ant-Man can just hotwire this piece of complex equipment. Though it's simple enough for a rat to accidentally activate it by pressing a button, so I guess that makes sense. Also, how are they going to get them back if their Pym particles are limited? Ant-Man and the Wasp have been shrinking down a lot for people with limited particles. They're trying to get the glove to the time machine, and we get to see an awesome meme-inspiring moment with Scarlet Witch showing us a taste of just how powerful she is. She manages to break the vibranium-destroying sword and almost kills Thanos, and he has to have the ship fire randomly across the battlefield to escape. Once again, we see no casualties from this barrage of missiles. This is twice. How is this happening? Anyway, we see that water is coming to take out the entire battlefield, and it's kind of pathetic that as someone who has the power to bend matter to his will, Doctor Strange is reduced to mopping up some rushing water instead of just moving the ground so it's no longer a threat. He is really underused in these movies, aside from his first movie where we just see his development, where it makes sense he's not as strong. The heroes seem to be in dire straits when suddenly the cannons turn and start firing at the sky, even though no one has made the command for this to happen. Lo and behold, it's Captain Marvel, here to make her singular contribution to the movie. She destroys Thanos' ship, and that means she's helpful, right? There are a number of heroes that could do exactly what she did, like Thor or Doctor Strange, but we have to have her in the movie because they made such a huge build-up to her in the last movie. Why do all of the cannons suddenly turn towards one person? It's not like she's much of a threat, as we see later. Honestly, this scene would have been a million times better and even made more sense if this is what actually happened.
What the hell is this?
Riley, what are they firing at?
Something just entered the upper atmosphere.
Anyway, she shows up and immediately knows what they're trying to do. She takes the stones and we see the assembly of the heroines. Never mind that she could just vaporize anything in her path with a blast from her arms, and we saw in her movie that she can move at literally the speed of light. Of course, right before she gets to the time machine, Thanos throws his now broken sword and destroys it, which wouldn't have mattered if they had done the logical thing and just gotten the stones as far away as possible. Thanos is now going for the stones and the heroes are struggling to stop him. Even Captain Marvel is struggling despite her immense power. Thanos then uses the Power Stone to punch her out of the movie, completing her irrelevance to the plot. Remember when she was just gonna go kill Thanos? Looks like she severely overestimated herself. At least we got this image out of it. Truly a beauty. Now Tony realizes what he has to do in order to defeat Thanos. They get in a little scuffle and Thanos kicks him away. He snaps and suddenly realizes that the stones are gone. He couldn't feel the lack of power from the stones. Why not? They seem to have a huge effect on whoever is wielding them, even Thanos. Anyway, we see that Tony now has them, and he decides to make the ultimate sacrifice, snapping his fingers. This isn't really the completion of anyone's developmental arc, however, because we have already seen time and time again that Tony is willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good. What would have made an interesting story for Tony is some realization that they couldn't save everyone without losing what they've gotten in the process. Nevertheless, we see what becomes the end of Iron Man. Thanos and his army disappear, and the Avengers have won. Now we begin an incredibly emotional scene of Iron Man's death. The scene really pulls on your heartstrings. However, why does Tony have to be dead? Isn't there some way to reverse what happened to him? Something that can bring someone backwards through time even after death? True, if they had done this, it would have made the scene lack sincerity, but it just bugs me that they don't even try. They could have had a throwaway line that showed that because the stones are what killed him, they couldn't reverse it, like with Black Widow. It would have made it seem more permanent, but the time stone is the very first thing I thought of when I saw this scene. Nevertheless, we are to understand that this is the end of Tony Stark. The emotion continues as we see everyone reuniting with the people they lost, a recording that Tony left for his daughter, and Tony's funeral. I saw someone I didn't recognize at the funeral, and after some research, it turns out it was the kid who helped him in Iron Man 3, so that was pretty cool. It would have been nice to know about this in the movie because I had to do some outside research to figure it out. Every one of these emotional scenes works really well no matter how many times I see them, especially the ones with his daughter. They're really effective for me. Unfortunately, we have to get to some more dumb stuff. Thor is talking to Valkyrie and tells her she's going to be Queen of Asgard so he can go goof off with the Guardians of the Galaxy. This is the final iteration of ruining Thor's development as a character. He's going to be who he is instead of who he's supposed to be. Thor's story has been, since the end of his first movie, the fact that he doesn't want to take responsibility and finally be the leader his people need, so the responsibility needs to be thrust on him at the end of Ragnarok. Now that he has justification to not take responsibility, he's just going to abandon his people so that we can have more funny scenes between Chris Hemsworth and Chris Pratt. So in this movie, we not only have Thor become a bumbling idiot and a coward, but also someone who deserts his people, all because mommy said it was okay to not become a better person. It's absolutely pathetic. At least they're funny. Now Captain America is heading into the past to return all the stones to prevent the opening of alternative realities. But he doesn't return when he's supposed to. Then the guys turn and who do they see? But Joe Biden! Oh no, it's old Captain America. Turns out he decided to stay in the past with Peggy, ending his time as Captain America. But here's another problem. How is he sitting there? How did he get there? They made it abundantly clear that going back to the past can't change the present, but somehow he's sitting here as an old man. Wouldn't they have seen him arrive? Wouldn't he have just disappeared into another time, not affecting the present at all? They've not only made their time travel theory incoherent, but they ignored the only real fundamental rule that they set. Therefore, if this happens, then wouldn't everything they do in the past change their present, completely blowing their time travel theory apart? Wouldn't they have drastically changed a massive chain of events leading to this point? The writers simply ignore this incoherence because they want to have this next moment. Steve passes the shield and the mantle of Captain America to Sam. It's a nice gesture, but there are a few problems with this. The biggest of these problems is that Sam is not a super soldier. He has no powers, no enhancements, no special abilities. His relevance to the Avengers is only because he has the winged jetpack. How can he possibly be Captain America? I know a lot of people point out that this is how it goes in the comics, but first of all, the comics are irrelevant to the MCU. It's its own separate story. Secondly, it is just as ridiculous in the comics as it is here. After this, Sam asks Steve if he wants to talk about Peggy, and he responds with a long-lasting meme. I don't understand why he wouldn't want to talk about the love of his life, but there's no way for us to see inside his head, so it's just left a mystery. The movie closes with a flashback to Steve and Peggy finally having that dance they planned at the end of Captain America: The First Avenger. I thought it was a good way to wrap up his story, even if you have to ignore some of the inconsistencies of how they got to that point. And that, my friends, is Avengers Endgame. I know that was a lot of information, so let's move to a short recap segment detailing what I thought was the best of this movie and the worst. The absolute best thing about this movie is obviously the performance by the actors. Pretty much every single one of them is extremely talented and their delivery is phenomenal. They truly become their characters, and we feel like we're actually seeing characters like Tony Stark living their lives instead of actors like Robert Downey Jr. pretending to be someone else. Casting really took a chance with a lot of these actors all the way back to the beginning of the MCU, and it really paid off for them. Next on the list, the emotional pull of this movie was really effective. There were times I felt excited, times I was anxious, and even times I was brought to tears. I'm a bit of a crybaby about movies though, so that may just be me. The emotional resonance of so many scenes almost makes you forget about some of the bad writing that's happening simultaneously, which is very impressive. Finally, as expected, it was a massive feat to put this movie together. They had to coordinate so many different actors and storylines, and the special effects and CGI were excellent. Now onto the worst of this movie. The worst thing about this movie was that they really dropped the ball with so many characters. They rushed character arcs, skipped over pivotal scenes of development, completely changed characters up, and just assassinated the credibility of pretty much all the main characters. Let's start with Tony. In previous movies, Tony has shown us repeatedly that he's willing to sacrifice self for others. In the first Avengers movie, he saves everyone by nearly dying to put an end to the alien threat. In Iron Man 3, he repeatedly puts himself in harm's way to protect not only those dear to him, but to stop a villain who would do irreparable damage to his country. So when we get to this movie, that's not really a point of contention. The biggest question before this movie was whether he'd be able to put the dangerous life behind him and settle down with Pepper, which is already accomplished right from the get-go, skipping the end of an arc. Then there was the constant setup for a big moral decision about whether he could sacrifice what he's gained for what's been lost. And they ignored all these setups, opting for the typical sacrifice of self. With Bruce Banner, they didn't let us see anything about the biggest point of his development. They just immediately show us the Hulk years after the resolution of their setup from Infinity War, completely skipping over something that was vital to this movie. Thanos, they removed the complexity of his character by turning him into a sadist. Before, when he would travel from world to world killing half the population, or when he used the stones the first time, it was never personal against anyone. He was doing what he thought would fix the problems in the universe, believing that the ends justified the means. In this movie, they turn him into a purely evil character with no complexity. He just wants to destroy everything, and he will enjoy doing it as well. Finally, we get to Thor. Apparently, suffering defeat in Infinity War was enough to destroy him as a character, even though he has suffered losses and moved past them time and time again. He was stripped of his power in the first Thor movie, he lost his mother and the support of his father in the second, his entire world was destroyed in Ragnarok, and his people were slaughtered in Infinity War. But because of this specific loss, he is now a cowardly, depressed, alcoholic, bumbling idiot who is nothing more than a joke anytime he's on screen. He just decides that there's no need for him to be a better version of himself, and he runs off, abandoning his people to fool around with the Guardians. What they did to the characters is just lazy and reductive. The other terrible thing is the utter abandon of all logic with continuity. Their time travel theory was constantly flipped around to the point of no return, and they even ignored their own fundamental claim that the past cannot affect the present if it's changed. They artificially generate tension by claiming the heroes only have one shot for no reason, and immediately abandon this premise as soon as the plot requires it to move forward. There's convenience after convenience merely to allow certain scenes to happen, even though, by all odds, many things we see shouldn't have been able to happen. So, does this movie really deserve the title of #1 grossing movie of all time? No. I don't think so. They only reached this goal because they re-released the movie with some extra footage to get die-hard fans to watch it again, and it wasn't even in theaters for very long. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give this movie a 6 at best. Well, that's all I have for you on this movie. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with any points I made, or if there's anything you think I missed. Also, since this is my very first video, let me know what you think I could do to improve the quality, or maybe make the videos a little more entertaining. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, as well as follow my Twitter so that you'll know when new videos are out. That's all I have for y'all. Thanks for watching.